March 18th, 1945. Near the Rhine River, Germany. Rain hammered the canvas roofs of the American command compound while exhausted soldiers moved through the mud, carrying crates of ammunition and frozen rations. Trucks growled outside the perimeter. Somewhere in the darkness, artillery echoed like distant thunder. Inside the headquarters tent, Captain Daniel Reeves stared at the German officer standing across from him. The man wore a black SS uniform beneath a soaked overcoat. Tall, pale, calm. Too calm. The guards beside him tightened their grips on their rifles. The officer's name was Colonel Victor Weiss, captured less than 2 hours earlier. But he didn't look defeated. He looked irritated. A young American corporal named Tommy Greer whispered nervously beside the radio table. "Why is he smiling?" Nobody answered. Because every soldier in the tent felt it. Something about the German officer felt wrong. Outside, more prisoners were being processed after a brutal firefight near a collapsed railway bridge. Most German POWs arrived exhausted, wounded, terrified, or broken. Not this one. Weiss stood perfectly still while rainwater dripped from his gloves onto the wooden floorboards. Then he looked directly at Captain Reeves. "You Americans celebrate too early." The translator hesitated before repeating the sentence. Silence filled the tent. Lieutenant Harris stepped closer. "You're a prisoner now." Weiss slowly turned his head toward him. "No," he said quietly. "You simply haven't realized your mistake yet." The room went colder. One of the medics stopped writing. Even the radio operator looked up. Captain Reeves walked around the desk slowly. "Search him again." The guards obeyed immediately. Pistol removed. Knife removed. Documents removed. Nothing unusual. Yet Weiss continued staring at them like he already knew how this would end. Then one of the guards found something sewn inside the officer's coat. A photograph. Not military. A family picture. A woman and 2 little girls. The youngest couldn't have been older than 5. For a second, the tent became strangely quiet. Corporal Greer frowned. He kept that through combat. Weiss took a slow breath. "Yes." The translator repeated it softly. Captain Reeves studied the photograph carefully. Then he noticed something else. The edges were burned, like it had survived a fire. What happened to them? The German officer didn't answer immediately. Outside, another burst of artillery rumbled across the wet fields. Finally, Weiss spoke. War happened to them. No one moved. The answer felt heavier than expected. Lieutenant Harris shook his head angrily. "Don't start acting human now." Weiss looked directly at him. "You think only Americans bury families?" The room stayed silent. Because nobody wanted to admit it. For months they had seen concentration camps, burned villages, dead civilians, children, wandering roads alone. Most soldiers no longer saw SS officers as human beings at all. And maybe they had reasons. Too many reasons. Captain Reeves handed the photograph back. Then everything changed. A jeep roared into the compound outside. Fast. Too fast. Men shouted. Boots pounded through mud. Seconds later, Sergeant Wilkins burst into the tent, breathing hard. "Sir, we got trouble." "What now?" Wilkins swallowed. 3 German officers escaped transport near the western checkpoint. Lieutenant Harris cursed instantly. "How?" "They killed 2 MPs. The room exploded with movement. Maps unfolded. Radios crackled. Orders shouted. But through all the chaos, Colonel Weiss remained completely still, watching, almost listening. Captain Reeves noticed it immediately. "You know something?" The SS officer tilted his head slightly. "No." But nobody believed him. Not after the faint smile appeared on his face. Lieutenant Harris grabbed him by the collar. "You planned this?" The guards raised rifles immediately. Weiss didn't resist, didn't panic. He simply stared back coldly. "You are losing control of your headquarters." Harris slammed him against the support pole. "You think this is funny?" Still calm, still emotionless. Then Weiss said the sentence nobody in the room would forget. "By morning, your command center will belong to us." Silence. Absolute silence. Even the rain outside suddenly seemed quieter. Captain Reeves slowly stepped forward. "What did you say?" The German officer looked directly into his eyes. There are still loyal men nearby. Nobody breathed. The threat hung in the air like poison. A few soldiers exchanged nervous looks. Because they all knew something uncomfortable. The war was ending. But desperate men were becoming more dangerous. Lieutenant Harris pulled out his pistol. "You threatening American command?" Weiss didn't blink. "I am informing you." The hammer clicked back. Several soldiers stepped away instinctively. Corporal Greer whispered, "Jesus." Captain Reeves raised a hand carefully. "Harris." "But sir, that's enough." The lieutenant hesitated, then lowered the weapon slowly, but the tension remained. Like one wrong word could start bloodshed inside the tent itself. Captain Reeves looked toward Sergeant Wilkins. "Double perimeter guards." "Yes, sir." "Wake every officer." "Yes, sir." "Search every vehicle entering this compound." The camp exploded into motion outside. Floodlights swept through rain. Machine guns repositioned. Soldiers ran between trenches and supply trucks. And through it all, Colonel Weiss sat quietly in a wooden chair with bound hands, watching them prepare, watching fear spread. Hours passed. The rain never stopped. Near midnight, another report arrived. A patrol discovered fresh tire tracks less than 2 miles from headquarters. American soldiers were now sleeping beside loaded rifles. Nobody trusted the darkness anymore. Inside the command tent, Corporal Greer finally spoke softly while staring at Weiss. "You really think somebody's coming for you?" Weiss looked exhausted for the first time. Then he answered quietly, "No." Greer frowned. "Then why threaten us?" The German officer stared down at the muddy floorboards. "Because frightened men make mistakes." Nobody spoke after that. Not even Lieutenant Harris. Because deep down, everyone knew it was true. Around 2 a.m., another convoy arrived carrying wounded Americans from the front. One of them was barely 18. Private Eddie Nolan, shrapnel through the shoulder. As medics carried him past headquarters, the boy looked inside the tent and froze when he saw the SS uniform. His entire face changed. Pure hatred. He tried to stand despite the pain. "That bastard, the medics held him down. You need treatment." "That uniform burned my town." The entire tent fell silent again. Nolan pointed shakily toward Weiss. "They shot civilians, women too." Weiss never looked at him, never defended himself. Private Nolan's eyes filled with tears. "My sister was 12. Nobody knew what to say. Not Captain Reeves. Not Harris. Not the guards." War had filled every man in that tent with ghosts, and suddenly the atmosphere shifted again. The threat no longer felt strategic. It felt personal. Lieutenant Harris stared at the prisoner with growing rage. "You people don't deserve uniforms." Still no response. Then Captain Reeves quietly ordered the guards outside. "Get General Patton's command line." Several heads turned instantly. The room changed. Even hearing Patton's name carried weight. Nobody asked why. Nobody questioned it. If there truly was a threat against headquarters, command needed to know immediately. And if an SS colonel was openly threatening American officers inside custody, someone higher had to decide what happened next. Hours crawled by. No attack came. No hidden German unit appeared. No rescue mission arrived. Only rain, mud, fear, and exhaustion. Then, shortly before dawn, engines approached the compound. Different engines. Heavy. Confident. Different engines. Heavy. The guards outside snapped to attention immediately. Boots moved fast through puddles. Officers straightened uniforms instinctively. Someone whispered, "Patton's here." The entire headquarters seemed to freeze. General George S.P. Patton stepped through the entrance without rushing. Polished helmet, ivory-handled pistols. Mud splashed across his boots from the storm outside, but his expression stayed perfectly calm. Every soldier stood straighter immediately. Nobody spoke. Patton slowly removed his gloves while looking around the room. Then his eyes landed on Colonel Weiss. The silence became unbearable. Captain Reeves stepped forward carefully. "Sir, the prisoner threatened command operations and implied an attack on headquarters." Patton said nothing. He walked closer to the SS officer. Closer, closer, until the two men stood only feet apart. Everyone watched. Nobody breathed. Weiss slowly looked up at him. For the first time all night, the German officer no longer looked comfortable. Patton studied him quietly, then glanced at the burned family photograph sitting on the table. The room waited. Finally, Patton spoke. "Colonel Weiss." The translator repeated it. Patton's voice remained controlled. "You threatened American headquarters while under protection." Weiss answered carefully. "I stated facts." Patton paused, then slowly sat down across from him. The movement itself felt intimidating, calm, measured, dangerous. "What facts?" Weiss looked toward the rain outside. "That Germany is not finished." Patton nodded once. "Germany is finished." Silence. The SS officer's jaw tightened slightly. Patton continued, "But frightened men with weapons are not." No one moved. Patton picked up the family photograph, studied it quietly, then looked back at Weiss. "You carried this through combat?" "Yes." Patton glanced at the two little girls in the picture. Then he asked the question nobody expected. "Are they alive?" The SS officer stared at him silently for several seconds. Finally, "I don't know." Something changed in the room, just slightly. The anger remained, but humanity slipped into the silence for the first time all night. Patton leaned back slowly. "I've buried soldiers younger than your daughters." Nobody spoke. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. Then Patton placed the photograph carefully back onto the table. "You threatened my headquarters because you wanted fear." Weiss stayed silent. Patton's eyes hardened slightly. "But fear is all Germany has left." The words landed like stone. Lieutenant Harris looked ready to explode with satisfaction. But Patton raised a hand slightly without even looking at him. And Harris immediately stopped. Patton returned his attention to Weiss. "You know why America will win this war?" The German officer said nothing. Patton answered anyway. "Because even now, after everything, my men still know the difference between justice and revenge." Complete silence. Corporal Greer slowly lowered his eyes. Private Nolan stared from the medic cot near the entrance. Even Captain Reeves looked affected, because every man there understood what Patton was really saying. They all wanted revenge sometimes. After the camps, after the massacres, after the dead civilians, after the children. But revenge was easy. Control was harder. Patton slowly stood. "You threatened this headquarters." Weiss looked up carefully. Patton's expression never changed. "But you will leave this camp alive." The room went completely still. Lieutenant Harris looked shocked. "Sir?" Patton turned toward him calmly. "If America starts executing prisoners for threats, then we become another frightened army hiding behind rage." Nobody answered, because nobody could. Patton looked back at Weiss one final time. "Your war is over, Colonel." The German officer's face tightened for the first time, not from fear, from realization. Patton stepped closer. "And history will remember who destroyed Europe." He paused, "and who rebuilt it." Then he walked toward the exit. The room remained frozen behind him. Right before stepping outside into the rain again, Patton stopped. Without turning around, he spoke one final sentence. "Feed the prisoner." Then he disappeared into the storm. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The tension that had consumed headquarters all night slowly drained away, not because the danger disappeared, but because something else had entered the room: perspective. Corporal Greer quietly handed the SS officer a cup of coffee. Weiss stared at it silently, then accepted it with shaking hands. The guards noticed immediately. The arrogant calmness was gone. For the first time since arriving at headquarters, he looked tired, human, broken. Outside, dawn slowly rose over the soaked battlefield. American trucks restarted. Medics moved wounded soldiers. Radio operators prepared new orders, and the war continued forward. But years later, the men inside that headquarters would remember that stormy night for a different reason. Not because an SS officer made threats, not because soldiers nearly lost control, but because one moment reminded them why they were fighting in the first place, not only to defeat evil, but to resist becoming consumed by it. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more World War II stories where humanity, war, and difficult decisions collided, make sure to subscribe.